It's not every day that you get to sit down with someone who has an impact on so many guitars on an everyday basis. We can sometimes neglect our guitars, and I'm guilty of this, and even not know how to make them perform at their best. Jarin Winterhalt has figured this out over his many years in the world of guitar repair and maintenance. Jarin is a guitar repair luthier, and we talked about his career so far, interesting guitars he's worked on, and tips for things to watch out for. So let's see what happened.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Fret Success Guitar Show. Today I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm here in Calgary in Guitar OR, and basically it's a repair shop. I'm here to talk to Jarin Winterhalt about his background, his story, the things he does day to day, and actually pull out a few tips and tricks for yourself when you're maintaining your guitar and things you might need to look out for, and just general questions that he gets asked to kind of help people along. So, hi Jarin, how you doing?
Good, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
Crazy, strange times that we're in.
It is. I feel safe here though.
It's nice and safe, everyone's gone home, so we thought we'd have a chat and sit down and do stuff. So
For sure.
I guess I really wanted to start a little bit with where your kind of passion for music started.
Well, growing up in small town Saskatchewan, there wasn't a lot of variety there. I've never really been one to do the same as everyone else, so I kind of gravitated towards music because there wasn't a lot of people doing it back then, and you know, you relate to it as a young teenager in your angst, and you just pretty soon it becomes your passion, and you follow with it with all you can.
So was it like at a very young age that you started to get into music? What were kind of the records that you were listening to? And
yeah, I was raised on country because that's all there was there. I think the first record I bought was Police Synchronicity. I think I ran downtown with my rubber boots to get it and probably paid about $9 for it. And then got into, heavy metal like any 14-year-old would do. And then tried to make a living at it after that. So I went to school, and then I've been doing it ever since.
So what kind of bands was heavy metal for you?
Oh, I was an 80s child to a certain extent, 80s, 90s. So there's a lot of hair metal. Not the greatest era for music, but Iron Maiden, Alice Cooper, Megadeth, How Do You Go Wrong? Metallica, the early stuff, How Do You Go Wrong? So I'd always sneak in a little bit of, Michael Bolton, Mariah Carey.
Sure.
But I just couldn't tell anybody.
So, Megadeth is still an amazing band to me. They still carry now. In that realm, I still think they're very relevant. So I might be a bit old-fashioned, but I don't know. I still love listening to that stuff. And I've recently been diving into the older tapes of sound checks and stuff. It's just very rare footage of them playing, and
Sweet.
It's amazing they're just such a competent band. I don't know, they're kind of, I think of them as like Metallica on steroids. I don't know.
Yeah.
They're just so intense to listen to, but I just love it.
Yeah, they were a lot more raw than Metallica. After Metallica kind of sold their souls a little bit.
Yeah, they still have their place, but yeah, I'm always tend to go to a Megadeth if I'm honest. You kind of write music yourself and do the...
I do, yeah. I released a CD a number of years back, and I did the singer-songwriter thing for a number of years. But it's a hard go, so I still love it, and I still do it, and I still play, and I play with friends, but it's just a different set of parameters now.
Sure. So then I guess you moved from that to more of the Repair Luthier type thing. So
yeah.
How did that start as from the beginning, I guess?
I befriended a gentleman that worked for a local music store, and we became pretty close, and he offered me a chance to apprentice under him. So I did that for a short time, and then he moved to the coast, and he had started a business. So I purchased the green list off him and just kind of jumped in head first. I don't know if I'd recommend that to anybody, but it worked out quite well because I came in contact with another gentleman and apprenticed under him for about 5 years. And both philosophical and technique-wise, he expanded my horizons, and now I've been doing it for probably 25 years. So I feel like I've seen a thing or two, and it's a really good craft.
So what pulled you into more of that side of things? And I know the financial thing probably pushed you a little bit, but why was it repairing instruments rather than going down the construction building kind of route?
Repairing, I find, I was raised in a small farming community, so working with your hands, working with tools, so I naturally gravitated towards that. It's just every guitar's got a little bit of a problem you've got to solve, so there's some digging around, there's some sleuth work to be done. It's really challenging, and I like repairs because it's different every day. There's different instruments, there's different challenges all the time. I find for building, you would have to set aside enough space that you could work on something for a long enough time before its completion, whereas repairs, you can get in there and you can get it off the bench in a few hours if need be. And it just keeps it fresh.
There's more variety, I guess.
Way more variety, I would find. Yeah.
And you get to dig into like older guitars and stuff rather than just being fresh off the shelf.
For sure. We've seen mandolins, ukuleles from the late 1800s, or not ukuleles rather, but violins from the late 1800s. Guitars, their popularity came around the 40s and 50s, so instruments from that era. A lot of great Japanese guitars in the 70s, so there's a lot of guitars out there that you know a lot about now. So when I look for tones, I have it pretty dialed in, I'd like to think.
Yeah, no, definitely. I find that's probably the thing that would draw me into the industry, is that the variety, and if you've got that exploratory gene in you that feels you want to know more about guitar and delve into the depths of where things came from, I think that was something that draw me to it.
For sure. There's so much out there. People don't really realize the history of guitar, but it dates back to, Chinese times, essentially, all the way from the lute up to now the 12-string bass, so there's history there. So it's exciting. It kind of, it fulfills an inquiring mind on a number of levels.
So what happens day to day in the world of your world, I guess?
Well, it's a business, so you treat it like a business. You have to be competent. You have to take care of the administration parts of it. The art is something that often people are good at, but they kind of neglect the business side of it. And people just don't want that. They don't want to deal with someone that's too eccentric. You have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to lay out a plan. You have to be able to work with a budget. We work with woods, we work with finish, and we work with electronics, essentially. So anything from basic crack repairs, basic setups, to full refrins, to complete electrical mods, to wiring circuits. It's every day there's something a little bit different. And even though I've been doing it for quite a while, I still enjoy that part of it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I've never had to have a guitar repaired up to very recently, which is how we met. My guitar fell from the sky and dropped and smashed, but it was amazing that you could actually just turn to something and just do it relatively quickly. Let's be able to do it, and it's just experiences that it comes down to, doesn't it? So just like
essentially experience and confidence. Like the rule that I was taught is never touch anything until you can see it from the beginning to the end visually, because if you're not sure how to do it, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. And the beauty of wood is everything can be repaired.
I've heard people want to get into this, and I have friends that have pushed the idea of doing luthier courses and stuff. So what would you recommend people do? Is it like more dive in deep and get like under an apprenticeship and follow someone, or follow a course, or tinker at home? What would be your recommended quick route, I guess?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a quick route. I get asked that all the time. There's schools, and they can be often quite expensive, and they'll often focus on building. So you're using their machines, you're using their techniques, and when you get out of that, it's not necessarily going to transfer to what you need to do. You can start from nothing and build it up, but it might take you an extra 10 years. Ideally, the way I train people and the way I was trained is through apprenticeships, just time spent. I look for a couple-year commitment, and we start with them doing super rudimentary stuff, and then it goes as far as they want to go with it.
Interesting. So your guys that have been trained here, is that what's happened? What's the mix of people that work under you?
Yeah, I've had a guy here for 4 years, another guy for 3, and then a guy just hired on a little while back. And initially, he's just doing stuff on his guitars, our guitars, or friends' guitars. He doesn't touch any clients' guitars until he's been here at least 4, 5, 6 months, depending on how keen he is. The guys that I have on full time, they've been here and they're fully competent. There's some stuff that I still prefer to do because I've done it more times than they have, and I think that if they were to open up their own business at some point, they would make that leap. But for now, we can keep them busy with a series of things that I can do, but I just would rather focus time spent on other things, ideally.
So like moving away from the repair side of things and more like onto the regular maintenance guitar stuff, like when would you say people need to think about getting a setup? What are the kind of characteristics or things that happen that make you think someone should have done that?
Yeah, Calgary is a tough climate. Calgary was voted the second worst place in the world to own an acoustic instrument, and it's because of the fluctuations. It's not only because it's dry here, but it often gets quite humid in the winter too with Chinooks. So fret ends sticking out, braces that you're feeling on the sides of guitars will be a good indicator the guitar is drying out. You can humidify it as best you can, but some people don't want to, and some people just don't have the ability to, and that's totally understandable as well. I'd liken myself to the mechanic that drives the crappy car. Like, I have guitars at home, but they just sit out.
Yeah.
If I need to adjust them, I do, but I don't baby them, I wouldn't say, because ultimately they're tools and they're meant to just make music, I believe. But working with woods, you'll find that they're under stress. So between humidity and adjustments, if the guitar is playing too high and it's hard to play, or if the action is too low and you're getting buzzing, that's a pretty good indicator you're going to need a setup.
Right, okay. So it's very much a feel thing for you to look out for.
Very much so. A lot of guys like the action just dialed in. So if that's the case and it dries out a little bit, the neck can straighten out and the action drops down. So one night it can play amazingly well and the next day you can get a ton of buzz. So that's just the joys of working with wood.
So how important is it for someone to do like a setup on a guitar that's fresh from a shop?
I'd say it's fairly important. You'd want to let it climatize a little bit. Like, if you just bought it, you wouldn't want to get it set up right away, because it's probably going to continue to move for the first month, 6 weeks. It depends what quality woods they're using. But I'd recommend getting this set up before you've had it for 6 months or a year. Oftentimes people will play them and then not realize the benefit of getting it properly set up. Music's hard enough, let alone fighting your instruments. So I definitely recommend anything coming off the shelves to get it looked at.
And do you think it's more cost effective or like time efficient to send it to someone like you, say every year or something, for just a regular checkup, or for someone to learn how to, intonate and all that sort of stuff? I guess people could do general basic stuff, but when it comes to truss rod adjustments and all this sort of neck positioning and stuff, it becomes more worthwhile, I guess. But
yeah, they often can. Some guys just don't want to, and that's fair. That's valid. Time spent to learn the techniques is tricky, because you often have to do it enough to get confident with it. So if you adjust the intonation and then don't touch it again for 6 months, 6 months later you might have forgot what you did. And then for us, we're gonna make sure that everything's dialed in, not just the intonation. There's a lot of things that show up on part of the guitar that haven't started from that part of the guitar. There are issues that are underlying that if you don't treat them properly, it's not gonna get you where you want to go. So a lot of guys do dabble, but we also see the guitars that their uncle, who used to play in a band, worked on, and it can make it considerably more difficult.
So what are the things that people do that you not generally, but sometimes have to rectify and think, oh, why have they done that?
A lot of things with string heights. Like, people will look at string heights and say, well, this guitar is hard to play, so let's sand down the saddle. And then you find out it's not the saddle, that the neck had way too much relief in it. So unless you take the relief out, the saddle doesn't do anything. So then it starts to buzz, and then they stick like matches underneath it, rolled up pieces of paper, and then they wonder why it doesn't quite sound as good. So it's understandable. A lot of people are just kind of hands-on, and that makes sense, but it's not always the best plan of action.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of getting stuff set up by somebody else. I can kind of tweak and tinker with other people's guitars and stuff. If I'm like round at their house at a party and like my guitar doesn't work, and I'll generally be able to get it going. But
yeah,
like, nothing beats just sending it to someone that does it every day, has the tools.
Yeah, if you do it enough, you can learn it. But it's like anything. I drive a car, but I don't necessarily want to change out the gearbox.
Yeah, exactly. What is the most common issue that you tend to fix? Like, either repair, breakage, or what's... I guess there's a few, depending on different guitars, but it'd be good to delve into a few of the most common things.
Most things are related to humidity and temperature in terms of cracking, frets lifting, high frets that cause buzzing when you're playing up the neck. You get into a lot of electrical issues that things oxidize over time. Dead circuits that they're just not sure where the problem lies. It's mostly to do with acoustics. I would say it's mostly crack repairs, bridges lifting, glue joints separating, expansion and contraction essentially. With electrics, it's more so electronics, dealing with noisy pickups, dealing with input jacks that cut in and out. If you're gigging, you just can't have it happen when you're on stage. Like, it's just, and nor do you want to have it happen when you're playing for a room full of friends either.
Has there ever been any like last minute emergencies you've had to go do things for someone? Or?
For sure. We get a lot of bands that come through town and they'll be in kind of dire straits, and a lot of them don't have a lot of money, so they'll kind of ask, who around town can do it, and we do whatever we can to help them out. If my main priority is a healthy music community. So if this guy's touring across the country in the back of a van, I'm probably not going to charge him full rate for much. at all. So the benefit is to being able to help the show go on, and I think that we play a role in that regard.
That's interesting, because you kind of delved into some of the local activities in Calgary, like I believe you've been part of the Folk Fest and things like that. So what's that experience been like? And I guess it's more of a tech side of things. But
It is. We've been working with the Folk Fest now for about 12 or 13 years. Last year was the first year I didn't, and that was COVID related. It's great. You see musicians coming from other countries that they don't appreciate really how dry Calgary can be, and things will move very quickly. So they have a fully functional banjo, and then 12 hours later they have a banjo with 2 strings that don't make sense. So I'm in the back. I have a little area set up, so we facilitate them in any way we can, and I think they appreciate it that the Calgary Folk Fest offers that.
that's really cool. Like, it's obviously back of the scenes and stuff.
Yep.
It's great, and it must be great publicity for you in a way. Yeah?
It is. Like, we mention it when we're advertising and things like that, but ultimately it's just the joy of meeting some really cool people, and also being a part of the live music. Like, when the main stage starts, most of those guys have their own guys, so they're flying in from cities where their instruments are well taken care of. So usually by then my day's kind of wrapping up, so I just go and grab a seat and just enjoy the music.
So, Jarin, you must have dealt with a lot of older guitars, some that look like they might be on their last legs, and others that are like collector items. So I'd love to delve into a little bit about whether it's worth fixing some of the older guitars and what kind of the cutoff point might be, and maybe some particular cases that you've dealt with.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of people just don't even know that our services are out there. If it's not in a music store, a big box music store, they don't think it's there. So that's one of our goals, is to continually let people know that we're here and what we do. We've had gentlemen that come in with early 40s, mid 50s acoustic Gibsons. Some of them quite valuable, some of them not so valuable. But from that era, they can be amazing instruments. And often the wood will be split. There'll be braces that are off. The neck will be a bad pitch, so then the string height's crazy high. And like I said, all wood can be repaired, so that's the beauty of it. You can get it completely back to functionality and then have it as a great instrument in the family for many, many years. One gentleman in particular brought in a 1944 Gibson L1, which was the learning guitar. So it wasn't a very high-end Gibson, but it was his grandpa's. So it was priceless to him, and he was convinced it wasn't going to be fixable. I think his brother had told him to throw it in the dumpster. Fortunately, he brought it in, and we were able to repair the split. The split was essentially from one boat all the way to the other boat, so it was almost in half. And it just took a lot of time. You got to glue it 6 inches at a time. You got to factor in the patina. You don't want to be changing any of that. You don't want to damage anything. So all these things just take time. And it ended up being an amazing guitar. Now he's got it at home and he loves it. And every time I see him, he tells me how it's doing. We had another gentleman that brought in a guitar essentially in a box. His daughter had smashed it in angst, and he wanted to get it back working again. So, we literally took it piece by piece and pieced it back together, and took a while, but it's an amazing guitar. We also get gentlemen that come in with 50s and 60s electrical instruments that they bought when they were teenagers. And they want to know, well, should I get it refinished? And the answer is no, because that patina is priceless. I'm fine with dings in my guitars. I think they tell a story. So if you're trying to find a guitar that's in immaculate condition and it happens to be 70 or 80 years old, that's a tall order. So part of my job is to guide them and help them make decisions.
Yeah, it's interesting because it'll be case by case, because some people have a guitar that isn't particularly worth a lot of money, but the sentimental value takes over.
Sentimental plays a big role, and that's totally understandable. We see that all the time. Yeah, they could spend more money on a new guitar, but it's not going to be the same guitar. Sometimes the best thing to tell them is to do nothing, though. It's great the way it is. So it just goes on a case by case.
So what are the kind of cool modifications that you've done to guitars? Maybe ones you've suggested, or ones that customers have maybe suggested and it's paid off?
Yeah, modifications, if they're older instruments, we typically try to keep them pretty consistent. We just try to get them back to where they need to be. In terms of newer guitars, sky's the limits. You've got bridges now that don't go out of tune. You've got pickups that are active and passive. You've got built-in circuits that offer you reverb and chorus and flange, and these are crazy effects and crazy tuners and locking tuners, and the sky's the limit. The marketing aspect of it is huge.
So like particular modifications for like, say, simple guitars like Telecasters and stuff like that, are they things that you kind of undertake?
For sure. Some of the biggest stuff you can do is just upgrade the quality of the material, because it's a machine that just reverberates. So for example, a bone nut makes a big difference on any type of guitar, especially acoustic, but also electric. Having a plastic nut on a high-end guitar is similar to having a Lamborghini with wooden tires. You know, it's not going to quite get you where you want to go. It looks very similar, but it's not going to quite get you where you want to go. So our job is to help these guitars sound the best that they can.
It's like, I remember watching a video that Paul Reed Smith did, and he's always talking about the subtraction of sound, which is interesting to me. Because like anything you have on the guitar that's not letting the guitar ring or the strings ring or resonate as fully as it can, such as the nut is detracting and dampening something happening. So just those little tweaks and changes, like there's that audio file thing where you have all these amazing cables and stuff and amazing speakers and a great room, but like it's all about the little changes just adding up to a difference.
For sure.
I think, and that's definitely the case in guitars, I find.
Yeah, it's like often for players, it's the final 5% that's the difference between a really good guitar and an amazing guitar. And our job is to help them figure out what they need to do for that. It could be as simple as poorly machined parts that just aren't resonating very well. It can be as drastic as really old low-geared tuners. So you just kind of figure out what's going on and how you can remedy it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I recently did an interview with Jason Lawler from Lawler Pickups, and I demoed some pickups from them, and just putting those in made a hell of a difference. And it wasn't that they were, you know, looking at both sets, you'd be like, they're the same.
Totally.
But just that extra bit just gives you that extra clarity, consistency, and I found that one of the biggest things I noticed was that the difference between the neck, on a Telecaster, the difference between the neck and the bridge pickup was less. Like it was more consistent. That seemed to be factored in as like a tele kit.
For sure.
So like I noticed on a lot of guitars, if you switch the neck up just because of where it is, it's a lot boomier sounding. It sounds more fuller than the bridge pickup.
Yep.
So like it was just nice to get that. It was only slight, but like it was amazing that you could more consistently use the guitar in a set using both pickups.
Yeah, when you get into winding pickups, it's an art unto itself. The difference between, like I said, a really good tone and a great tone can be the strength of magnets. You know, as simple as that.
Yeah, it's amazing. So yeah, there's a whole video that I did on it, but it was amazing to talk to him about the nuances of.
And smaller companies, you can phone Lawler and still talk to Jason.
Yeah.
You know, there's something to be said for that. You phone Seymour Duncan, you're not talking to Seymour Duncan.
No.
That's just not happening.
The thing that was great about talking about him and there was that the consistency that he said was so important. Like he could have pickups that he would send to people and they would be demoing for like guitar placement in the products, the guitars they were building, and they would send the same units out like a year later and it was on the same. So it was...
For sure.
There's a lot to be said for that, I think.
Yeah.
And do you think that that's something you stand by? Is that when someone brings a set up for you, is it consistency key for you as well?
It is, in terms of we set it up to where we think it should play really, really great, and if it doesn't, then we need to figure out why it's not, and then we remedy that and get it playing great. But everybody's a little bit different. You're a blues guy, you want it higher than lower, then you don't want lower action, so you're not going to have dealing with high frets that cause buzzing. You're a shredder, you want it super low. You don't want any high frets because it's going to cause buzzing. You're an acoustic, a cowboy chord player, you can get away with quite a bit. Like in terms of playing ability, you just need a guitar that sounds really good. You're playing some Tommy Emmanuel and you have a different set of parameters.
I guess that comes back to how varied and interesting the job can be.
For sure, and knowing your clientele as well.
Yeah, I guess you have a lot of regular people that come back and you kind of get to know what they expect from instruments.
For sure, we're really lucky. We've been in business now for over 15 years, so we have guys that we've been dealing with since essentially day one. I know them on a personal level, I know the styles they play, I know what they're looking to get out of the guitar, and that helps a lot. I couldn't imagine dropping a guitar off at a store and just saying, set it up, I'll be back in a week. To me, it's more personal than that.
Oh, definitely. Like I hate that whole kind of chuck it at the shop and they'll deal with it. It's like if you've not had a detailed conversation about what you want and even played it and say this is... I bet you get a lot from just watching people play and say, well, this guy needs it like that.
For sure, and just the style of music. You know, you're not getting too many shredders that are playing old tellies, and you're not getting too many blues guys that are playing ESPs. The thought of dropping something off without explaining it, you get high frets and they raise the action and magically the buzz is gone. But now it doesn't play very well. So to me, that's not a happy middle ground.
So what are the main and common like maintenance things that you wish people would take care of more, I guess?
That's hard to say. I find cats tend to knock over a lot of guitars, so I would probably keep your guitar away from your cats.
Okay.
That's probably number one. Other than that, it's just being aware. Like if your frets are sticking out, then that means it is dry. But do you want to humidify it and religiously humidify it until the frets feel normal again, or you just want to remedy the fret ends? That's logical as well. In terms of humidity or in terms of just playability, I would just ask them to ask themselves what they're looking to get out of it. Like I said, not every guitar offers everything to everyone. There's not a great guitar that's a perfect hybrid between Gibson and Fender. If there was, they probably wouldn't make too many more guitars. But when you go for a Fender, you're looking for a certain sound. If you go for a Gibson, you're looking for a certain sound. And that may take you 15, 20, 25 years to figure that out. But once you figured it out, then you know this is the guitar for me.
One thing that's always baffled me a little bit is the whole humidity thing, and you've touched on it a little bit. Like, what is the best thing to do? Like, I guess as a broad brush approach, like, how do you look after your guitar humidity-wise?
In the summer months, you're pretty safe, especially if the guitar's got some age to it. It's not really going to move a whole lot. The humidity level is pretty decent. In the winter, if it's a new guitar, you want to humidify it for at least the first winter, because it can go under stress right away. A lot of high-end guitars are lightly braced with little to no finish, and that's where they get their sound from. But they are also susceptible to cracking then, fluctuations in temperature and humidity. So my recommendation is for the first winter, to be on it, to keep it in the case and keep it humidified. After that, it starts to absorb impurities from the environment and it starts to seal the wood off a little bit, which makes it a little safer to work with it in different parameters. But until it happens, it can be very stressful. A guy drops $5,000 on a new guitar and then 3 weeks later, you got a 6-inch crack. It can be extremely stressful. It can be repaired, but it can also be extremely stressful. So if you are on the ball initially, as it ages, you can start to relax a bit.
So I thought about this because I relocated a couple of years ago and always wondered what to do about things like, because it's okay, I guess, if you get a new guitar and then you go through the process of humidifying, but like moving location to a different environment such as this is obviously like it's a fresh guitar.
It's tough. We see stuff coming in from Vancouver and Toronto that they're by the ocean or by the Great Lakes, and 6 hours later they're under stress. 2 days later, if left if left not dealt with, they can be in dire straits. Calgary is tough for that in terms of taking it. Fortunately for Calgary, taking it to other places is usually beneficial. In most places, everything's built for coastal cities. Nobody's thinking Calgary, they're thinking Vancouver, Toronto, Seattle, New York, So then when they build an instrument, they're not concerned about
high and dry.
The plains, the plains of America or the Western Canada. They're just not. So they're under different parameters for that. So if a small percent of the population find it difficult to humidify, they're willing to play those odds.
So what is the best way of humidifying a guitar? Like, there will be different levels and stages of complexity, I guess, but like, are you able to talk through a little bit of the different types of humidification?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways. Like, guys that are playing a lot will often have a humidified room, so you need a hygrometer, you need a good humidifier. You need to keep an eye on it so you don't run out of water and have everything go from 45% to 10%. That's where you're going to cause the stress. If you have a guitar that's humidified at 50% and you take it to your buddy's place to jam and you leave it for the weekend there, but he doesn't have any humidity, it's going to be under stress immediately. Whereas if we aim for about 35 at the shop here, then if guys take it out and it dries, it's not quite so severe. Another way to go is just to keep a good humidifier in your case and try to keep it in the case as much as you can, especially in the winter. Hygrometers always help because often people will look at their furnace on the wall and say, it's 42%, and then you actually look at a response or a good hygrometer and it could be 12%, it can be 15%. So trust a hygrometer over a lot of things, and then just keep an eye on it in terms of the acoustic capabilities of it. If it's moving, then chances are it's under stress.
So what systems are good for like in the guitar case itself?
I'm a fan with high-end guitars. We build them ourselves. We just use Tupperware containers that we get from the dollar store or Safeway, and we poke holes in them. We stick a big sponge in there because the reality is a lot of the humidifiers that are meant for guitars don't work very well in Calgary because the sponges dry out so fast.
Yeah.
You'll get gentlemen that swear that they're on top of it, and because they fill up their humidifier every 3 or 4 days, but the reality is it could be dry 18 hours later. So then actually the guitar expands when it's in humidity and immediately contracts when it dries, which causes the problems. It's the fluctuations that cause the problems. So a bigger humidifier is the way to go, something that you don't have to worry about, setting your clock to and checking every couple of days. So we find that the sponges and a lot of them aren't that great. So we make our own. Oasis is one you can buy over the counter that I really like. It has a bunch of water and you can tell when it's dry because it shrivels up. Some of the other ones I find they're more clever marketing than they are effective.
Right, okay. That's interesting because it's something so simple. Like it's not even a complicated thing.
No, not at all. It just allows the guitar to just relax and if it goes into a stressful environment, it can deal with it because it's been relaxed. If it's under constant stress and then it goes into a weird environment or it takes a knock, that's when people wake up and they got, a 10-inch crack and maybe it costs $300 to fix it. When you could have just used a
sponge.
In a bag even.
That's insane. So Jarin, you must have dealt with a lot of different guitars, had some come in that you were like, oh my God, I never thought I'd see one of them. And you must have a couple sitting at home. Every guitar player has a few.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to talk through some of your favourite players because you get to play a lot of guitars. So
right.
Which are your favourite kind of guitars?
Electric-wise, being raised in small farming community, everybody that we saw in the videos and whatnot played tellies. I love tellies. They're so simple. Just 2 pickups and a volume tone. There's not much that can go wrong. It's either there, it's either in your fingers or it's not. So I'm a big fan of those. Obviously Strats. They're so versatile. The main ones, Gibson Les Paul is a consummate guitar. People tolerate the tuning instabilities because the tone is unlike anything else.
Yep.
I talked earlier about the potential to hybrid a good Fender and a Les Paul, and I think Paul Reed Smith does a really good job of that. I'm also a fan, we're big fans here of Japanese builds. Guitars, they're typically in the 70s because most of the factories closed down around late 70s. So they're already 50 years old. Area Pros were guitars made for Canada. They're awesome. Eldega, they're awesome. You can get them for $300 and they can rival a made in Mexico Strat. The made in American Strats and guitars like that are often better, but then they're often 5 times the price too. In terms of acoustics, I'm a big fan for Larravé's. A good once was Canadian company, started in Quebec, moved to BC, and now they're in California. But you don't pay a lot for the name, you just pay a lot for the guitar. Big fans of those. Morgan's, lots of good luthiers in BC, lots of good ones in Quebec. There's some great builders in Calgary here that people don't know of. So Larravé's is one of my favorites. The old Japanese builds, Yari, Takai, amazing guitars. If you can buy them on Kijiji, they're often $400 or $500, but jump at them because you get them set up properly and they can sound like a $2,000 or $4,000 Martin.
I love Larravé's guitars. Like they used to come in secondhand in the UK in the shop, and I always wanted one. And then when I bought my last acoustic, I didn't have the money to buy one. I was like, I need one now because my other one went. So it was like, oh, I really want, but I'm definitely going to get one at some point.
Yeah, they're more expensive now because you pay the import tax.
Yeah.
Because they're made in the States, they have a little bit more prestige to them.
Sure.
10 years ago, you could buy a guitar that was for $1,300 that is now $2,100.
Yeah.
So I would rave about them and I would tell everybody to buy them. Now, if you're looking at $2,100, kind of in the $2,000 to $3,000, you can look into the Gibsons and the Martins as well and find something that you might find comparable. But yeah, it's in terms of playability and performance, they're tough to beat.
So what are some great lower budget guitars? Like, what are your kind of ones that you think that's really good value for money? Like electric and acoustic would be.
Electrics, sky's the limit on made in Mexico because you're not paying for the name, but you can swap out the electronics and you can have an amazing guitar. There's not a huge difference, in my opinion, between a Mexican and American Strat besides the made in USA sticker and the price tag and the pickups. You swap out the pickups and you're into it for a third of an American made, and it'll rival an American made any day of the week, in my opinion.
Yeah.
In terms of acoustics, Godin is a Canadian company that makes good quality Seagull, Simon & Patrick, Art and Luthier. We recommend them to a ton of people. Once again, you're not paying for the name, so it's bang for buck. You can often find them on used sites for fairly cheap because you're not paying for the name. There's some guitars we definitely don't like, but probably shouldn't mention that too much.
Yeah, Epiphone are okay.
They're super all right.
They have their place, but yeah, I always wonder because my first guitar was a second-hand. It was like Washburn Mercury 2 series. It was like a Strat-looking thing.
Yeah.
But it had a Floyd Rose on it, and I was into all that sort of stuff. But it was a mahogany neck, and my dad knew about looking at guitars. He had a good eye for joinery generally, so he took me to kind of pick out my first guitar, and it was about $300, but I've still got that guitar now.
Yeah.
It's amazing, still solid. I think I had to repair one bit where the Floyd Rose supporting like column, the kind of pin that went through the body, they'd routed too much in the cavity, so the block had kind of shifted.
Yeah.
So I like replaced and blocked it out and padded it out. So it's been great ever since that. But I always tell people to go down the used route, but the confusion is there that you probably have to have someone that, if you can get lucky and get a good one, but you have to have someone with you that kind of knows what they're looking for. It
helps. Like to go to look at a guitar used, is it a bad guitar because it's not playing well, or is it a bad guitar because it's not a great guitar? A good setup can remedy a lot of things. Good guitars start with good chunks of wood, and from there the sky's the limit. If you're starting with poor quality of wood, everything you do to it may not get you where you want to go.
Yeah, it's interesting because I always toy with the idea, because it's all right if you're going with someone to say, oh, this plays good or this needs the neck tweaking or something, but like it's hard. As a beginner, it's overwhelming.
For sure.
Nowadays, like there's so many guitars out there. It's unbelievable. And so many young companies, and there are great ones out there, but there's so many that I don't even keep track. I can't keep track of all the companies that are out there that make guitars.
There's so many. Now with the advent of the internet, you can buy guitars from Bangladesh. There's no need to go in their city anymore unless you want to. You can go around the world. It's a tricky endeavor. Like if I'm going to buy a car, I don't want to be going by myself. I'll take a buddy that knows a lot about guitars, or cars rather.
Yeah, I always struggle to give advice because people ask me a lot. Like online, they're always like, "What's a good guitar for even $100 or something?" I was like, I still can't believe you can get a guitar for that much money. But I find it a struggle to recommend. I was like, get something cheap and dirty, but save up for something better. I don't know.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll come across the cheap ones that just sound awesome.
Yeah.
We got some clients that have been playing guitars and high-end guitars for years, and their favorite guitar is the one they bought in grade 10. It's gone with them. It's opened up. The more you play them, the better they sound. So it's aged really well, and they can be really amazing. Like it's the same way for high-end guitars. You don't just want to go in and buy it because it says Martin or Gibson on it. Ideally, you try 5 or 10. Maybe you go to another city and try 4 other Martins there before you buy the one you like, and then it's worth it. But if you find one that maybe is not so amazing, maybe it's not worth it.
Yeah, because I tell people to take their time. Like, don't rush. I find that people are always in an emergency to get this weekend or whatever. Just, I don't know. When I pick a guitar, I know my girlfriend to hell because she's the only person that tends to come with me. And I'll sit and play it, and she's like, it sounds the same as the last one.
Totally.
But I don't know. I spend weeks going to shop, and just what else do you do? I don't know.
That's the way you should. But a lot of people look at the name and then they go, everything else falls into comparison after that. The way I was taught is a lot of people look at name and then aesthetics and then tone and then structure. I was taught Stan, where you look at the opposite way. It's structure, tone, aesthetics, and then you find one that you like the name. I
always tend to shut my eyes when I'm playing the guitar half the time when I'm demoing it. And I find that so much more important, and get people to hand me guitars blind, because even knowing that, you still go, oh, this is a nice looking guitar, and it still subconsciously makes you think a little bit. It's hard to be objective sometimes. Crazy hard. That's why the marketers get paid so much money. Like if you're raised on watching Joe Perry play a Gibson, you're going to want a Gibson. The Rolling Stones, if that was your dice back then, you're going to want a 52 Telly. You're going to want a Dove or a Hummingbird. And they can be great guitars, but they can also be super average. So what are your favorite guitars to work on when you get them? Which ones are the more consistent and joy to they move the way you think they're going to move? And well, I guess elaborate on that. I guess.
I would find most guitars do. There's often guitars that don't respond the way you would expect them to, but with enough time and care, you can usually find out why. Some guitars you can't remedy. Some guitars you need a new neck, things like that. That it's just not worth putting the effort into fixing them. You're better off maybe buying another one. But you need to kind of go down that path to be able to determine that with certainty, and that takes a bit of time. So most guitars are pretty compliant. I find it's just a little bit of love and a little bit of skill. You can do a lot of things.
And do you prefer doing the woodwork side of things rather than all the other stuff?
I do, for sure. The electronics part, it's very mathematical. It makes sense. But if one wire isn't hooked up correctly, it's sometimes nothing works. So you can often spend a lot of time just perusing the circuit and trying to figure out what's going on. So I tend to have my guys do those a little bit more, and then I'll deal with the wood aspect, because I find where that's the craft part that I really enjoy.
So you can see the start to finish more easily, I guess.
Yeah, and it's very grassroots. You're just dealing with wood. Wood is never going to change. Different types of wood have different characteristics, but those characteristics don't often fluctuate amongst guitars. Maple's maple, rosewood's rosewood. You've seen enough of them, you can start to predict how they're going to work, and they're usually pretty consistent.
So I've kind of been avoiding this question, not on purpose, but how many guitars do you have and what do you have? I'm intrigued.
Well, I got a few that I can't tell my wife about, I probably got about 12 or 14.
Okay.
I'm a bass player by trade, so I've got a number of basses. Some of the guitars I buy, though, I know that they need work. So I've got some beautiful guitars that can't play them right now because they need neck resets or they need rebracing. And I keep thinking I'm going to get back on them, but it's tough to find the time. So they're in the queue, but as of now, my clients' guitars take priority.
So what was your first guitar that you bought?
It'd be an old Samick, Samick bass that we ordered over the phone, and they shipped it out on the bus from Saskatoon. And when we got it, I put some new strings on it, but I didn't realize the strings shouldn't go an octave above bass strings. So I literally snapped all the strings.
Wow. I've never heard anyone do that before.
Well, I just figured tune it to E, and they didn't say which E, so I grabbed an E, and I was like, this E sounds pretty good, and then I just would slowly tune it up, and then one by one they snapped, and then I phoned the store back, and I said, well, these strings are obviously broken.
They are now.
You're sending me terrible strings, what am I going to do here? And they said, no, you probably tuned it way too high.
That's amazing. I don't know, it's scary getting to that point where they might break, I don't know.
It's very scary, actually. Oftentimes I'll wear goggles. Sometimes I'll back away. Yeah, it's definitely taken some years off my life.
Yeah, I don't know. My first guitar, I didn't have any of those crazy moments. So that's really crazy to hear.
Well, there was nobody in town playing. It was a small town, and like I said, I had to get it shipped on the base because the city was 2 hours away, and we couldn't get away. And then I didn't know much about bass. I just knew I wanted to play an instrument, and that's where it all started. So
one thing I hate with my first guitar is because it was the Floyd Rose. Every time I restrung it, I had to trim the balls off the end of it and do that. So I remember that being a pain. And I know you could get ones without and stuff, but
Floyd's can be a challenge. Yeah. Even to this day, you get guys that have been playing for 30 years and some Floyds just don't cooperate.
I used to have it really tight and tensed. I don't know, I just found I kept it more to the bottom rather than being properly floating. I just found it more consistent for my guitar. It just didn't go out of tune as much.
It is more consistent. Like I tell people, if you buy a Floyd and it stays in tune, keep it. If it's a $300 Ibanez and it stays in tune, keep it, because you might sell it and then buy a $4,000 Ibanez and find it doesn't stay in tune worth a damn. And that's just, I'd like to say we know exactly why that's happening, but physics-wise, they're all built pretty consistently. So it's one of those unknowns that we just tough to pinpoint.
It was interesting. I listened to the audiobook Birth of Loud. I don't know if you've heard it or read the book. And it's about the story of the Fender, Les Paul and Gibson and Bigsby and how the kind of electric guitar came to fruition. And I found a lot of detail and interest in that. And actually the thing that I found most iconic about Fender was something that you don't really think about. And when you mention bass, it's the fact that the upright bass went to the electric kind of bass. And that was actually, in that book, was the focus of the P bass. It was it became this revolutionary thing. You could play a bass sitting down without having to stand and do this. And I thought that was fascinating, that actually you'd always think of like the Stratocaster, the Telecaster, and they were great instruments. And actually, if you listen to that book, he kind of stole elements from Bigsby a bit, and Bigsby kind of made the first electric of that kind.
Yep.
And kind of went through that. And it's, if you haven't listened to that or read that book, it's amazing. Like it's a good little audio book. It's like 10 hours long. But I found that the focus on the P bass was interesting because it was that revolutionary thing that now you don't even think about it. A bass is played this way.
For sure, the advent of the pickup changed everything. Before then, it was banjos, because they're the only thing that compete with horn sections. Upright basses, because they could compete with horn sections. Until then, there was no point in having an electric guitar because you would just be up there strumming and nobody would hear anything. When the pickups came into play, it changed everything.
No, it's amazing what's happened in such a short space of time. But still, the guitar hasn't changed that much from then.
Yeah, the mojo from the old instruments is just, you can't even say what it is. People have taken them apart and they've reverse engineered basses 100 times over, but there's something to be said for an early 60s P bass.
Yeah, I love the sound of the P bass. I don't know, it's just got that sound.
Yeah.
It's so unique. Like a Tele sounds like a Tele, but there's nothing that sounds like a P bass that's like through a valve amp driven. I don't know, it just sounds...
Exactly. I know some older gentlemen that before they could afford a P bass, they wired their own pickups because once the technology was out there and it spread, you could do it. Probably didn't sound very good, but it got them to the point where they could plug in and they could start playing dances and they could start doing these things without having to carry around an upright, and yeah, it changed everything.
Yeah, pickups are amazing. What an invention. So moving away from guitars, you must deal with other instruments. So what are the other things that you kind of touch and deal with? And
yeah, we do. When I started, I made a point of taking almost everything on, just to know it, because I knew 10, 20 years down the road, I would have seen it enough times that I was completely competent with all aspects of it. So I tell people bass, banjo, mandolins, auto harps, ukuleles, but we do lutes, we do balalaikas, we do old school tenor guitars, we do banjo ukes. There's a whole hybrid of ukes that are mandolins, but with skins. Basically anything that has strings on it, really. They all share so much in common that if you're competent in one, the skills will transfer over into other instruments.
So, like, what is the most expensive instrument you've ever worked on? Have you been asked this before?
Yeah, I get asked that quite a bit. We've had some early mid-50s Gibsons that are, in terms of resale, upwards of 100 grand perhaps, but priceless to the people that own them, and I don't think they'll ever sell them. We just had a really nice custom Martin in last week that I think the gentleman had paid about 17 grand for. So it changes your approach. You've got to look over at everything before you start, because you need to know everything about that instrument before you start working on it. So it can be tense, but it's also very rewarding because a lot of guys don't want to touch them. So if we can help the gentleman out, then we're happy.
No, I would be scared to touch them, if I'm honest.
Yeah, like I was taught when I was learning, first rule is do no damage. Like if you do an amazing job on 3 of the things he's asked for, but you leave a 3 millimeter scratch, then that doesn't matter. The good jobs you do don't matter. So that's priority number 1 is protecting the guitar at all times. We have a responsibility to the instrument as well. It's not just the owner of the instrument. That's the philosophy that I was taught, so I stick to that.
That's a great way of looking at it, because you don't know where that's going to go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even on the inside where people don't think you're going to see it. I tell my guys that 10 years down the road, some guy can be looking in and with a mirror and say, well, this doesn't look very good. There's a lot of glue kicking around here. Who worked on it? And if they say Guitar OR, then that doesn't make me happy.
No.
So we have a responsibility to look at it, because a properly maintained guitar can be in the family for hundreds of years.
Right, well, it's been amazing to catch up with you, Jarin. I really appreciate it. And hope it's been nice to get some of those things off your chest that you maybe want to tell people and kind of get out a bit more. So.
Yeah, it's been great. No, I'm glad you're here, and thanks for coming.
No, absolutely. So if you can subscribe, check out Jarin's business, which is Guitar OR, if you're here in Calgary. And he does a great job of my stuff, so I recommend him highly. So I will see you all in the next episode. Thanks so much.